Real talk, real people. Rooster AM with Ryan Nelson.
Hello and welcome to Rooster AM. It's Ryan Nelson, and today do I have someone truly special here with us today. Her name is Paula Davidson. This woman has lived a life of experiences, and I have to admit, when we first met, I probably wasn't her most favorite person. I was a young pastor. I was very green. I was doing crazy things at the church. She looked at me like I was foreign, like I was some alien from another planet. But wow, has that changed. Paula, you warmed up to me, and today I can proudly say that you are absolutely one of my favorite people. Your love, your kindness, your deep care for others, not only in the church, but outside of the church, it's awe-inspiring. This is a woman who has let her own pastor cry on her shoulder. She's been there for me when I was in need. And today we are going to talk about something truly special. Paula, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited about this conversation because I know that there are a lot of people who go through hard times, some of these hard times that you've went through, and they've asked themselves, how am I going to make it? Why, God, why? And your testimony is truly powerful, and I can't wait for them to hear it. Welcome, Paula.
Sorry, Ryan. Thank you for asking me to do this. I really appreciate this for sharing Jen and I's our story.
It's an incredible story. The first time I heard it, we were in a small group, and I think we were in a small group, and you shared it, and I thought to myself, "Wow, that is Romans 8:28." When you read Romans, it says, and we know that those who love God, all things will work together for their good, um, and for those who are called according to His purpose. And I know that you were called to His purpose. So was Jonah. And that's a beautiful story that I think people need to hear. But before we get started, I'm going to have a bone to pick with you, and I'm going to try and pick that bone. What was it that changed about you, about who I was after the first time we met? Because the first time we met, you weren't too happy about the decision of this young pastor, but that changed over time. What was it that made that change?
Well, when you first came, I seen this young man that was on fire for God, but I also he came in and was changing everything in the church. And of course, I've been there since '69 when Jonah and I got married. And I didn't join the church until 1973, but there were a lot of things in the church that I really didn't want to change. And when you started ripping the carpet off of the stage and then painting the stage black, and I mean, it was like part of my history was being wiped away on that stage. And I know that sounds a little weird, but it's the truth. But it took me a while of praying about it and thinking about it. That is just a building. There are memories in there, but things change over time, and I had to accept that and go on. And then in doing so, when you started preaching, the preaching about grace hit me so hard. I knew grace, but not in the way that you were preaching it. And I am so thankful for that because I look at things, I mean, not that I look at things a lot differently, but yet I do. I don't know how to explain it, but I just do. And I really appreciate what you have preached over the time that you were there.
Oh, those are kind words. I think it was I remember one of the time that really stuck out to me was, uh, oh, she was there only a very short time. Sat in the back with Bill. She passed away. Meyer family. Oh gosh, I loved her. She came up to me though, and she was in her 90s, when I was there, when I first got there.
I do remember, but I can't think of her name.
Oh, she walks up and she has tears in her eyes. She looked at me and she said, "I've been going to church for 60 years." She said, "And I've never once known that God loved me until today." And that blew my mind, that people would go their whole life to church, hearing the word, but yet feel condemned their whole life and not understand God's real grace, the grace that he offers people. And it's not a one-time deal. I think that's where people get confused. They think grace is a one-time offering, and then after that you have to be perfect. But grace is ongoing. It never stops. It's like you're a piece of a pottery that's cracked, and God's going to pour his grace into that pottery. And yep, we're going to mess it up and it's going to go through the cracks again and it's going to keep falling out. But he continues to pour. It's never ending. And then one day we're going to all die. We're going to stand before the Lord, but that pottery is going to be completely healed with no cracks. And we'll be filled up with the grace of God forever and ever, for eternity. And we won't even remember the wrongs that we had made. And people miss that. And this lady who said that, oh, it just warmed my heart to know that someone in their 90s, I think it was probably 2 months later she passed away.
It wasn't very long. She had a daughter by the name of Merle, and she was wheelchair bound. And the daughter passed away, and for the life of me, right offhand, I cannot think of the lady's name.
Lillian. Wait.
Yes, I think.
Lillian.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Lillian. Yes, that's it.
In my head. Lillian.
Yes. She'd been in our church for many, many years. And the wonderful thing about when Merle was alive, we would be saying the Lord's Prayer. And Merle, bless her heart, she had several problems. And she would be saying the Lord's Prayer, but it was like it was echoing as we were saying it, and it was just beautiful. Wow. It was absolutely beautiful because it echoed off of what we were saying. It was, I always look forward to Sunday and saying the Lord's Prayer, and then to hear her, that gives me cold chills to this day. Yeah. She was a little sweetie.
Well, she had challenges in life, and yes. Yet God still used her on it every single week. He would use her. People would hear it, and it would just bring warmth to your heart. And that's something about your husband. Your husband is a legend. I never really got to meet him. I'm sure that me and him would have had a great time together. But he was a legend of the church. He'd been there for a long time. Every person I talked to was like, Jonah was great. He was one of the best individuals, very likable. Everybody loved him. He owned a business. I know that he had rules. I'll let you share those rules when you worked with him. He's just all around was a good man. And I didn't know this when I first met you, that you'd lost your husband. And then one day you shared with us that you lost your husband. And when you went through the story, I was just blown away by the impact not only he had in his life, but even in his passing, how he still affected people's lives. So I'm just going to sit back and let you share that story. I'm not going to try and interrupt unless I just feel led to, because I think the story alone is powerful. So go ahead and share.
Do you want me to start from that story or start from our story?
You can start from your story. Whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Okay. Well, give you a little bit of history. Like I said, we were married in 1969. I was still a senior in high school when we got married, and he had graduated the year before I did, and he was working out at Failings at the time. We had 41 years of marriage. We had 2 children. We moved to Breckenridge. And have lived there for many, many years. Jonah was raised at Willow Road Christian Church, and his mom and dad were stout Christians. He had a brother and 2 sisters. but Jonah was one of these people that he just believed in God so much. He wanted to share that. Over the years, it was more evident that he was a Christian. But as years went on, Jonah's health, first he became a diabetic, and then several years later, he had a widowmaker, and he was saved by that, thank goodness. And then many years later, I'll just start at 2010. He had a stress test done, and they found that he had a blockage. And so they went in to take care of the blockage, and it was so thick that they couldn't do anything with it. So they had to do open heart surgery. And in doing open heart surgery, he didn't really want to. And then finally, between the two doctors, Dr. Bartolozzi and Van Heuser and myself, we convinced him that he needed to have the surgery. And he did. He was off of work for 3 months. He worked for Right Way Construction as a welder at that time. And as it went on, Jonah was doing very well after the surgery, went back to work. I mean, there were some complications off and on, but he really was doing good. He was even riding his bike in the evening. He would ride it if he had a doctor's appointment, he would ride it from Breckenridge to the doctor's office and then back to Breckenridge. Well, this went on for months. Things were fine. Well, then about, I'm going to say 2 months before he passed, he started, there were some signs of him. He wasn't riding his bike. He he was just tired all the time. And he wasn't really complaining. He was not a complainer. But I don't know, there was just something different. And so the day, I'll never forget this. Excuse me.
That's all right. You take your time.
It was, Jonah had the surgery. So this was a year. He had the surgery in June of 2010. And the year 2011, in June, he came home that evening on the 27th of June, or the 28th, I guess. Anyway, my dates are mixed up. But anyway, he came home, and it had been 103 that day, and he was working out at Capron. And it was horrible, because when he came in the door that evening, he had sweated so much there was salt on his uniform. And he said he was so tired, he was going to eat, and then he was going to get ready for bed. Okay. Well, the next morning he gets up, and I get up and fix his lunch. And I could tell that something was just not right. He usually told me he loved me before he left. He didn't even do it that day. He went out the door and he left. Well, I had to be at work about 12 or 1 that particular day, and things were going fine until about 3 hours later. Then I get a phone call from Right Way Construction telling me that Jonah has gone down. And I'm thinking maybe he might have had a heat stroke, because he had had one before and didn't think too much about it. Well, they took him from Capron to Share Medical, which is in Alva, and they told me that I could either go or I could call. And I was going to leave the hospital where I worked, and my supervisor said, let's just wait, maybe you ought to call. And I did. And when I did call the emergency room, the ambulance was just pulling in to the hospital, and the doctor said he would call me right back. Well, 10 minutes later, if that, they called me and said he was gone. He had a massive heart attack. So
in that moment, what did you feel? Was it a complete shock at that moment, or was it just devastation?
It's like it wasn't real. I had just seen him that morning before he left. I mean, when you live with somebody for 41 years and then all of a sudden they're not there, it was like, this is a bad dream. This is not real. I don't remember a whole lot other than the fact that when I hung up, there were several people that were surrounding me and my two supervisors, and they put me in a wheelchair. But before they put me in the wheelchair to take me downstairs, before they called my family, I don't know why I did this, but I kept hitting. I kept hitting with my foot the bottom of the desk or where I was standing at. I guess that was me. That's the way I dealt with it. I don't know why, but I did. But I do remember them taking me down, and then I was in this room, and administrator of the hospital, he was there. There were several people there. I'd worked there for at that time when I retired, it was 41 years, so it had been several years prior to that. But then my best friend, she came in and they got a hold of my son, and then he was on the road. And then Jana, my daughter, came in, and I had to tell her that her daddy was gone. And but God is such an amazing, he's just amazing, because everything that I had in me to tell her that her dad was gone, it was like, I don't know, it's like I wasn't telling her, he was telling her through me.
Because the Spirit of God works.
Oh, definitely.
And He'll take over. Certainly when we're in the state of shock, He'll take over. And that's what's a beautiful thing about being a believer, is in those hard moments, you don't even have to ask. God just comes.
Yes.
And it's the same thing I tell people when you pray. If you don't know what to pray, it's okay. The Spirit will pray on your behalf, and He will send it there and take care of you. And in that moment, you had no idea what to say, but the Spirit of God moved, and He didn't stop moving there. I'm going to spare you from having to relive a lot of this, that grieving moment, right? So there's a lot of grief that happened, certainly probably with you and your family. And how many months went by before you decided to go back to work? Was it, or weeks?
No, it was weeks. I went back to work 3 weeks after he passed.
Okay, so imagine this, people who are listening. The love of her life of over 40 years passes away. She's going through the grief. She finally decides to get up the courage and go back to work. And then she goes back to work, and this is what, just when I heard this, I got chills. Because it is that Romans 8:28. I know there are people listening today that you have probably lost a loved one, and you've been in so much pain and so much hurt, and you've maybe looked to the sky and shaked your fist at God and said, why? Many times we never get to see the why. We can live our whole life thinking, I know that God's used it for good. How? I don't know. but he has to, or it doesn't make any sense. You got to see it firsthand. This is chilling, ladies and gentlemen. So just listen closely to what happens when she finally goes back to work. Share what happened that day.
I hope I can get through this. Okay, so 3 weeks after Jonah passes away, I go back to work. I work in the lab as a phlebotomist, and we were very, very busy that day. I'd just come in the door. There were 3 assignments. There was 3 phlebotomists. I took the one that was from the emergency room. I go to the emergency room. I go in where they want me to draw blood. And there was a young man standing by the gurney, which I'm surprised he wasn't laying down. He had a blood pressure cuff on his arm, and I went in and told him I was from the lab and I was going to draw blood from him. And I set my equipment down and explained how I was going to, and had him to sit down on the gurney. And he's very jittery, and his blood pressure was very high, which I like. Once again, I'm surprised that they didn't have him laying down, but he kept getting up. So anyway, he just out of the blue starts telling me that he hadn't felt right. He was dizzy, and he kept thinking he should come to the hospital. Now, in saying that, he was out north, not north, but west, so he's out by Woodward. So I'm not exactly sure what kind of...
People who aren't from Oklahoma, that's probably 30, well, maybe an hour away.
Yes.
Hour west.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I'm not real sure what kind of work that he did, but anyway, somebody brought him in because they kept thinking maybe there was something worse than just being dizzy, that, there's something else going on. So he's telling me this story, and in saying this, he said, I heard of a gentleman that was working, and he was a welder. And I said, oh. And he said, I said, did you know this man? And he said, no, but he worked for Right Way Construction.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's her husband, by the way.
And I said, oh. And he said, yes. Well, I'm trying to stay calm and cool, that I know who this gentleman is. This is my husband that he's talking about. And he said, all I could think about was I need to get to the hospital because this could be happening to me. So anyway, I went ahead and drew his blood, and I went to the desk, asked them if they needed anybody else to be drawn, and they told me no. And I said, you guys, you won't believe this. But he came in because of Jonah passing, and he was afraid he was having a heart attack. And I said, please do not say anything to him who I am. I don't want him to know. So anyway, I go ahead and I go back upstairs, and I tell my supervisor what had just happened. This took me a while to get back, get my thoughts together, because what on earth would that happen? I mean, my first day back to work after you lose your husband, and somebody comes in. But the most wonderful thing out of this whole experience was after I got off of work, I kept thinking about this young man, and I thought, I wonder what happened to him. So I went down, and yes, they sent him to Oklahoma. They sent him to Oklahoma City, excuse me, because he was having heart trouble. And if it wouldn't have been for Jonah, he might not have listened, but he did. So even though Jonah was gone, he still had a part in God's wonderful plan. He saved this young man's life.
And he was young. He wasn't an old. How young was he?
I'm guessing 34, 35 maybe.
And how old was Jonah?
He was 61 when he passed.
Jonah was 61, and his passing saved this man's life who was in his 30s, who might live another 30, 40 years, who will raise his children, who may have grandchildren. And most people wouldn't have ever known the impact Jonah had to a whole other generation of children. But you got to experience that. And what I want people to hear is that typically we don't get to experience that. I always encourage people to pray this prayer when you're going through hard times. Lord, let me see it. Let me see the good. Because I believe that he'll reveal it to you like he did for you. And I bet you it wasn't just one. I bet you there were 2 or 3 people who probably heard that story and went down. And God used that moment, because God has perfect timing. He knows what he's doing. It's as though Wade said in a podcast, he goes, Christ holds the keys to life and death, right? The real question isn't when we die, it's why did he let us live? I mean, that's the real question. Why did he let Jonah live? First, because he brought glory to the Lord. And I'm going to just jump back a little bit, because I mean, that's the story there is incredible, because you got to see the glory of God work through your husband who wasn't even here. God was still working through him. But your husband was that testament in life. I love the story that you told me about when he had people work with him for the first time, what he would do. Share real quick about that.
Well, he had Jonah, being the welder that he was very, very particular about certain things. And he had a lot of welders, helpers, and just newcomers. And right away, seeing this person that had all this knowledge, and they would have these young guys to ride with Jonah. And he had rules for his truck. You didn't smoke in his truck, and you didn't cuss in his truck, and you listened to the Christian channel in his truck. And the thing is, there's so many of those guys that after Jonah passed, that they would share this with me. And I said, yeah, that was Jonah. And now let me tell you something. I mean, Jonah did have a way with words at time, and he did have a cuss word in there, but there were certain curse words that you didn't say.
Oh, I get it. I'm going to tell you right now, as a pastor, people look at pastors and think that these men are supposed to be perfect. They believe that leaders of churches are supposed to be perfect. And the truth is, they're not. We're all imperfect.
Right.
But we do our best. And Jonah did his best. Like, he did his best in showing God's kingdom to people, even when they got in his truck. And most people don't know that welding is kind of a roughneck position. There's a lot of people in welding that you wouldn't want to date your daughter, right? But he was one of the good ones, and he brought light into a dark place. That's what I always say. Let's try that. Love God, love people. Let us bring light into darkness. That's been my motto for a long time. And not even knowing your husband, but I do know he brought light in dark places, because there was a lot of people that you don't know that I've talked with, that shared with me about Jonah, how incredible he is. Even Tina told me how incredible. There's so many others that did, and I just sit back and say, thank you, Jonah, for impacting this pastor, because many times people come along, and I'll have them in my office, or now I don't have an office, but now I have them, come to the house, and they'll be hurting. And I never had the experience, nor did I ever have the story to share with them to give them comfort and encouragement until I met you, Paula, until I heard about Jonah. What a fitting name, Jonah, too, to go with Jonah the prophet, who was exactly the same. Jonah did not want God to take him to Nineveh. Jonah did not. Jonah was even mad when he left. He was like, I did what you wanted, and these evil people. I can't even believe, Lord, that you're doing this. Why don't you just let them all die? Because God used the bad and used it for the good. And he did it through Jonah. And he did it through your Jonah. And Paul, I just want to say thank you for coming here today and spending the time to share that story. I mean, I can do an hour, but I know that was a lot for you to share in this little 30 minutes.
It's still, as long as it's been 13 years. But that story still gets to me. He still gets to me. It was really something because I was trying to prepare for this today, and I thought, why are you worried about it? You've talked to Ryan about this. But it was so funny because last night I had a dream, and Jonah was in the dream, and he had a book. I guess he was trying to tell me what to say in this, but regardless of what I have said, it's still emotional, and it probably always will be, because when you love somebody that much, and he was such a wonderful person, and we were so young when we got married, who would have thought,
There was a time that you came in and you shared a story with me, and I was like, Paula, this is what you do. And I walked you through that situation. And then I found myself in a similar situation. And I remember you came in and you looked at me and said, you grabbed me. I was pretty shaken. Grabbed me and you looked at me and you go, do you remember what you told me what to do? You need to do what you preached to me. And I was like, wow. Ladies and gentlemen, when you go to church, you're sitting and you look around and you see people with the gray hair, because that's what happens. These seasoned people, and you think they don't understand me. They don't know they don't get today. They don't understand what we go through. Ladies and gentlemen, they've been through the same thing, the same messes. You should lean into them and say, my ears are open and I'm ready to hear what you have to say. I know a lot of times they would come in my office, and Paula, I remember you would say things, oh, you know so much, you're just so the Ryan show. But when Ryan hits the bottom and he's at the rock bottom, it was your wisdom that brought me back up to my feet. I want to say thank you for that. Thank you for you. Thank you for Jonah. And can I say a quick prayer before we head out?
Please do.
Father, thank you so much for giving Paula the courage to share today about her life, about her husband, about the trials that she had went through, and how she has persevered to the end. Because, Father, the saints, they persevere. So many times we struggle to understand your ways, because your ways are not our ways. Father, we come to you and say thank you for the blessing of showing your ways, and how you can make good things come out of bad situations, and how you continue to use people not only in their life, but even after they've came to you. It's a wonderful thing for me to know, to say, God, thank you for giving me the opportunity not to know Jonah in this life, but to know that I will get to see him in the life to come. And there will be a time when myself and Jonah and Paula are sitting around a table with you, sharing about this moment, sharing about the miracles that you performed through his life for others. Father, we just say thank you. We give you the glory. Amen.